The wind carried the echoes of her laughter, but now the streets knew only silence. Mira sat by the window, watching the rain trace sorrowful patterns against the glass. Love had once filled this house, but now it was just a memory wrapped in whispers. She had given everything to him, her trust, her dreams, her heart. And yet, all that remained was an empty chair, a faded photograph, and the question that haunted her every breath: did I ever truly matter? The sound of soft rain tapping against the window fills the quiet room. Mira stands by the glass, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the surface, her breath fogging up a small patch. The city outside moves on, unaware of the storm brewing inside her heart. She used to love the rain. Aiden always said it was their thing, something meant just for them. Now it only felt like an echo of something lost. She closes her eyes, allowing herself to slip into a memory, one she has replayed countless times. Aiden's laughter, light and carefree, fills her mind. They were at a park, the wind playing with her hair as he held her hand, swinging their arms back and forth like children. "Do you think we'll still be like this when we're old?" he had asked, his brown eyes twinkling with mischief. "Of course," she had replied without hesitation. "You and me, always." The words felt so real back then, a promise she had carved into the walls of her heart. But somewhere along the way, they had stopped feeling like a promise and started feeling like a lie. Mira snaps back to the present and turns away from the window, her eyes falling on the coffee table where a framed photo of them sits. The edges are worn from how many times she's picked it up, held it, tried to feel something other than the emptiness creeping in. She walks over and lifts the frame, brushing a thumb over Aiden's smile. "Where did we go wrong?" she whispers to no one. The answer doesn't come, but the memories do. She remembers the first time she noticed the shift, the moment something inside her whispered that love shouldn't feel this quiet. It was a Wednesday night. She had spent hours making his favorite meal, lighting candles, setting the table just the way he liked it. She had been excited to see his reaction, to hear him tell her how thoughtful she was, how much he loved her. But when he walked through the door, he barely looked at her. His eyes were glued to his phone, his expression unreadable. "Hey, babe," she had greeted, forcing a smile. "Hey," he replied absent-mindedly, dropping his bag by the door. She waited for him to notice the effort, to ask about her day, to kiss her the way he used to. But all he did was sit down at the table, scroll through his phone, and mumble a distracted thanks when she placed his plate in front of him. She wanted to ask him what was wrong. She wanted to believe it was just a bad day, just stress from work, just exhaustion. But deep down, she knew. Love wasn't supposed to feel like this, like silence wrapped in skin. Nights turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. The spaces between their conversations stretched longer, the warmth between them faded. The kisses became routine, the "I love yous" sounded rehearsed. One night, as they lay in bed, Mira turned to him, studying the curve of his face in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. She wanted to reach for him, to ask him if he still saw her the way he used to. Instead, she whispered, "Are you happy?" Aiden's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, he just stared at her. Then he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Mira, what kind of question is that?" "A real one," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. That should have been enough of an answer. But she waited, hoping. "I don't know," he admitted finally. Something inside her cracked. "You don't know if you're happy with me?" He exhaled, looking away. "I don't know if love should feel this hard." The silence that followed was suffocating. Mira felt like she was drowning in it, gasping for air that wasn't there. She wanted to scream, to ask him what had changed, to remind him of the promises they made. But she didn't. She just laid there, listening to the sound of her own heart breaking. That was the moment she knew love had become something they carried out of habit rather than want. And she didn't want to be loved out of obligation. The next morning, she woke up to the smell of coffee, but not to a kiss on the forehead like before. Aiden sat at the table, staring at his phone, his brows furrowed in deep thought. "Aiden," she said softly, sitting across from him. He looked up, waiting. "I don't think we're okay." For a second, something flickered across his face. Regret? Guilt? But it was gone too quickly to hold on to. I know, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Her throat tightened. So what do we do? He hesitated, then sighed. I don't know. And that was the real problem, wasn't it? He didn't know if he still wanted to fight. That night, Mira lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of Aiden's slow, steady breathing beside her. She wanted to wake him up, to tell him she was terrified of losing him. But she knew the truth. She had already lost him. The next morning, she packed a bag. She stood by the door, her fingers trembling as she gripped the handle. Aiden stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, eyes heavy with unsaid words. Mira. She shook her head, blinking back tears. Don't. Please. If you loved me, you wouldn't have let us get here. He didn't stop her. As she walked out the door, she took one last deep breath. The air felt different, lighter. She wasn't sure where she was going, but for the first time in months, she knew one thing for certain. She deserved more than a love that only whispered. You said. The sun has barely risen, casting a muted glow over the streets. Mira walks aimlessly, gripping the strap of her bag as if it's the only thing keeping her together. The air is crisp, the silence almost comforting. But inside, a storm rages on. She keeps moving, afraid that if she stops, the weight of everything will crush her. She checks into a small motel on the outskirts of town, the kind with faded curtains and creaky floors. It isn't home, but then again, neither was the place she left behind. The room smells of dust and old memories, like it's held secrets of people who came here before her, trying to escape something they couldn't bear to face. Mira drops her bag on the floor and sits at the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. Her phone vibrates. She doesn't need to check to know it's him. Aiden. She lets it ring. A part of her wants to answer, to hear his voice, to hold onto the tiny thread of familiarity. But she knows it will only unravel into more pain. Her fingers hover over the screen before she finally turns the phone face down on the nightstand. No more waiting. No more hoping. She lies back, staring at the ceiling, her mind a tangled mess of memories. Flashback. 6 months ago. The first time she truly felt the distance, it was a small thing. An insignificant moment, something she almost brushed aside. But in hindsight, it was the beginning of the unraveling. It was a Sunday. She had made coffee the way she always did, his with a little extra sugar, just how he liked it. She walked into the living room, smiling, ready to curl up next to him like they always did. But he was already there, his laptop open, a concentrated frown on his face. Hey, she had said softly, setting the mug down beside him. Hey, he muttered, eyes still fixed on the screen. She waited for him to look up, to meet her eyes with that lazy smile he always gave her. But he didn't. She told herself it was nothing, that he was just busy, that she was overthinking. But then it happened again. And again. Dinners that used to be filled with laughter became silent meals where he barely looked at her. Conversations that once lasted for hours were reduced to short, clipped responses. And worst of all, the way he used to touch her. The soft brushes of his fingers against hers, the lingering kisses, the warmth of his arms wrapped around her, had been replaced with empty, habitual gestures. Love, she realized, wasn't just about saying, I love you. It was in the way someone looked at you, the way they made you feel seen. And Aiden, he had stopped seeing her. Back to the present. Mira shifts under the motel's thin sheets, the weight of loneliness settling in her bones. The silence is different here. It isn't the heavy kind that filled their apartment, suffocating her with words unsaid. It's lighter, like an empty canvas. She should be relieved, but all she feels is lost. Her phone buzzes again. She closes her eyes, inhaling deeply before finally reaching for it. Aiden's name flashes across the screen. She doesn't answer. Instead, she types a message. Mira, please stop calling me. I need time. A few seconds pass. The typing bubble appears, disappears, appears again. Then finally, Aiden, I just want to talk. Please. She stares at the screen, her heart aching. She knows if she answers, she'll fall back into his orbit. She'll let him convince her that things can go back to how they were. But they can't. She puts the phone down and rolls onto her side, hugging the pillow close to her chest. Sleep doesn't come easily. The next morning, Mira finds herself at the cafe down the street, the rich aroma of coffee filling the air. She sits by the window, watching people pass by. The world keeps moving, even when your heart feels frozen in time. She thinks about the version of herself that used to sit across from Aiden at coffee shops, her hands wrapped around a warm mug, laughing at something silly he said. That girl was so full of love, so sure of the future. She wonders if she'll ever be her again. A part of her wants to hate him. It would be easier if she could. But all she feels is exhaustion. Because the truth is, she knows Aiden isn't a bad person. He didn't mean to hurt her. He didn't wake up one day and decide to stop loving her. It happened slowly. The way seasons change. The way a song fades into silence. She pulls out her phone and stares at their last text. The weight of it lingers in the air between them, even though they're miles apart. Then, before she can stop herself, she types another message. Mira, I don't think we can fix this. This time, the typing bubble doesn't appear. Minutes pass. Then an hour. Then 2. Still nothing. She exhales slowly, setting the phone down, letting the finality of it sink in. It shouldn't be this easy to let go of someone you once built a life with. But maybe love doesn't leave in a grand, dramatic exit. Maybe it just slips away quietly, unnoticed, until one day you wake up and realize you're already gone. Mira takes a deep breath and watches as the morning light spills across the pavement outside. She isn't sure where she's going next, but for the first time in a long time, she knows she won't be looking back. Night has fallen, and Mira sits on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the dim glow of her phone screen. Aiden hasn't responded to her last message. Hours have passed, and she wonders if this is the moment their story truly ends, not with a fight, not with a grand goodbye, but with silence. The same silence that had been growing between them for months. She lets out a deep breath, standing up and pacing the small room. The air feels heavy, pressing against her chest like an invisible weight. Her fingers tremble as she reaches for her jacket. She can't stay here, not tonight. She needs air, space, something to remind her she still exists outside of what she's lost. Mira steps out into the cool night, the distant hum of city lights flickering in the horizon. The streets are quieter now, empty in a way that mirrors how she feels inside. She walks aimlessly, her mind drifting through memories she wishes she could forget. Flashback. 2 months ago. She should have known something was wrong the moment Aiden started coming home later than usual. At first, she had convinced herself it was just work, that he was tired, that they were both just going through a rough patch. But the way he looked at her had changed. The warmth in his eyes had been replaced with something distant, something unreadable. She tried to reach him, to pull him back into the love they had built together, but no matter what she did, she felt him slipping through her fingers. One night, she waited up for him. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching into eternity. She had prepared dinner, hoping tonight would be different, hoping he would see the effort, see her. But when the door finally opened, it wasn't relief she felt, it was dread. "You're late," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Aiden didn't look at her as he set his keys on the counter. "I told you, I had a long day. Aiden, we need to talk." He exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mira, can this wait? I'm exhausted." She swallowed the lump in her throat, her hands clenching into fists at her sides.
"No."
"It can't," he sighed, finally looking at her. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me the truth." Silence. A heavy, crushing silence. "There's someone else, isn't there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Aiden's jaw tightened. He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told her everything. Her heart shattered into a million pieces. Back to the present. Mira stops walking, the memory hitting her like a tidal wave. She stands in front of a quiet cafe, her reflection staring back at her from the darkened window. She remembers the way she felt that night, the way the world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She had loved him. God, she had loved him with everything she had. And yet, love hadn't been enough. She exhales shakily, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. She doesn't know how long she stands there before she finally moves again, pushing the door open and stepping inside. The cafe is nearly empty, save for an older woman behind the counter and a lone customer sitting by the window. The scent of coffee and freshly baked bread wraps around her, comforting in a way she hadn't expected. She orders a cup of coffee and takes a seat in the farthest corner, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. For the first time in a long time, she lets herself just sit with the silence. Her phone vibrates. Her heart leaps before she even checks it. Aiden. She hesitates before opening the message. Aiden, I'm sorry. 2 words. That's all he has to say after everything. Mira stares at the screen, waiting for more. But nothing else comes. No explanation. No fight to keep her. Just sorry. She swallows past the lump in her throat, her grip tightening around the phone. For so long, she had been waiting for this moment, for him to say something, anything, to make sense of it all. But now that it's here, she realizes something. It doesn't change anything. She could reply. She could ask him why, demand answers, demand closure. But what would be the point? He had already left her long before she walked out the door. With a deep breath, she types her response. Mira, I know. And then, with a final exhale, she deletes the conversation. She slides her phone onto the table and watches the steam rise from her coffee. The night outside is still dark, but the heaviness inside her chest feels lighter. Maybe, just maybe, she is finally ready to let go. The cafe is quiet except for the low hum of a distant radio. Mira watches the steam curl up from her coffee cup, her fingers wrapped around the warmth. The weight in her chest still lingers, but it's different now. Less crushing, less suffocating. She has spent months drowning in heartbreak, but tonight, something shifts. Maybe it's the silence. Maybe it's the way she finally deleted his messages. Or maybe it's the simple realization that she is still here. Still breathing. Still standing. She takes a slow sip of her coffee, savoring the taste, the heat sliding down her throat. It feels like the first thing in a long time that she can actually feel. The door to the cafe swings open, and a gust of cold air rushes in. A couple walks inside, laughing softly, their fingers intertwined. Mira watches them for a moment, a strange feeling tugging at her chest. She used to be like that. She used to believe in love that was loud and alive, love that filled rooms and left echoes in its wake. But now, she wonders if love is meant to be something else. Something quiet. Something gentle. Something that doesn't leave bruises on your heart. She exhales and pulls out her phone again. Her fingers hover over Aiden's name in her contact list. She could call him. She could ask for closure. Ask for the conversation they never had. But what good would that do? Closure isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you give yourself. With a deep breath, she presses down on his name. Delete contact? Her thumb hesitates, but only for a moment. Then she presses yes. And just like that, the last thread between them snaps. Mira stares at the screen, expecting regret, expecting pain. But instead, she feels free. She slips her phone back into her pocket and takes another sip of her coffee, letting the moment settle. For so long, she had been trying to hold on to something that wasn't hers to keep. Now, for the first time in a long time, she allows herself to let go. The next morning, sunlight spills into her motel room, warming the sheets. Mira stretches, her body feeling lighter than it has in months. She blinks at the ceiling, a small smile tugging at her lips. Today feels different. Not better, not perfect, but different. And different is enough. She swings her legs over the side of the bed and reaches for her bag. The past few days had been a blur of sadness and self-discovery, but now, she knows it's time. Time to stop running. Time to start choosing herself. She pulls out a notebook and flips to a blank page. For a moment, she just stares at it. Then, with a steadying breath, She picks up a pen and begins to write. Things I want to remember. I was not hard to love. I was not too much. I gave my heart honestly, and that is something to be proud of. Love should never make me feel invisible. The right love will never leave me questioning my worth. Healing isn't a straight path, but I will keep walking. I deserve happiness, even after heartbreak. She exhales slowly, running her fingers over the words. This is her closure. Mira stands outside the motel, her bag slung over her shoulder. The air is crisp, the world buzzing with life. For so long, she felt like she was stuck in the past, drowning in a love that no longer existed. But today, she is stepping forward. Not for Aiden, not for the girl she used to be, but for herself. She pulls her jacket tighter around herself and starts walking. She doesn't know where she's going yet, but that's okay. For the first time in a long time, she isn't looking back. She is ready to begin again. The road stretches ahead of her, endless and full of possibilities. Mira walks with a steady pace, her bag hanging off one shoulder, the crisp morning air filling her lungs. The past still lingers somewhere in the back of her mind, but for the first time, it doesn't feel like an anchor. It feels like a lesson, a chapter she has finally finished reading. She reaches a small bus station on the outskirts of town. The bench is cold beneath her as she sits, watching people move around her, caught up in their own lives. She used to believe her world had stopped the day Aiden let go of her, but now she sees how life moves forward, no matter how broken you feel. A sign flickers overhead, buses heading in all directions. No destination calls to her in particular. Maybe that's the beauty of it.
She can go anywhere. She can be anything.
A voice cuts through her thoughts. You look like you're searching for something. Mira turns, finding an older woman sitting beside her. Her eyes are warm, kind. There's something knowing about her presence, as if she's seen many people sit here with lost hearts and uncertain futures. Mira chuckles softly. Maybe I am. And have you found it yet? The woman asks. Mira looks down at her hands, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on her palm.
Not yet.
But I think I'm getting there. The woman nods, as if she understands. Pain has a way of making us believe we'll never feel whole again. But we do. In our own time. Mira exhales, nodding. The words settle deep inside her, resting in the cracks of her heart like a gentle whisper. A bus pulls up, its doors hissing open. The driver leans out. Where to? Mira glances at the schedule, scanning the list of destinations. Her fingers tighten around the strap of her bag. Aiden was her whole world once. She had thought she couldn't exist without him. But now she realizes something. She was never just a part of his story. She had always been her own. She looks back at the older woman, who simply smiles and gives her a small nod, as if telling her she already knows what to do. Mira stands, shoulders back, chin up. Anywhere but backward. She steps onto the bus, the doors closing behind her. As the vehicle pulls away from the station, she doesn't look back. She doesn't need to anymore. The screen fades to black. Soft music plays. A whisper, barely audible, lingers in the silence. I will heal.